Welcome to The Hidden Truth, Breaking the Silence. I'm your host, Jonathan McLernan. Each episode we explore stories of individuals and how they've been affected by being a part of a secretive Christian fellowship. The stories shared here may include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Dysfunction happens when doctrine meets dogma and silence is paramount. So let's pull back the veil on today's episode of The Hidden Truth. All right, welcome back to the show today. I'm very excited. I always say the expression, but I mean, I always feel excited that someone is willing to come forward and to share their story in first of all, to help shed a light on the issues that have been plaguing this fellowship, but also to give other survivors hope as well. And it takes tremendous courage to come forward and share stories. So, Dale, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And so to kind of lay the background for your story here, if you could just share a little bit about your experience with fellowship in terms of born and raised and what that was like for you growing up.
So I was born and raised in the truth. I'm one of 6 children. On my father's side, I'm third generation in the truth, and on my mom's side, fourth generation. So a very deep history of being part of this fellowship. I professed at 11 years old, baptized at 12, and it was just, expected, basically. And we grew up, my parents always provided for us. We never felt that we didn't have what we needed. But we never had any conversation. It was children to be seen and not heard. What parents say goes, and what the workers say trumps that.
Right.
Whatever the workers say, whatever they want you to do, whatever you hear from the platform, that is the truth.
Right.
And you don't question it.
And where was it that you grew up?
I grew up in Denver, Colorado.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. When you think about like the different, and why I asked that is because I think maybe in different areas, there's, we have this idea that like this fellowship is sort of uniform across the globe, and it turns out it's not even uniform across various states and provinces.
Right. Yes.
And so, you grew up, I guess, in the 60s, 70s there?
60s. I was born in 58 or 56. Okay. So in 60s and 70s, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. And I think one of the things that put within this fellowship, like Denver or Colorado on the map, was their stance in around the divorce and remarriage issue. But was that ever discussed back then, or was this something that came about later?
When I was young, it was never discussed, as probably didn't really hear a lot about it until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
Several couples moved from Colorado to Minnesota, where it was more acceptable. And so, yes, Colorado had a pretty strong stance on the marriage and divorce issue.
Right. And so for yourself growing up, and you mentioned you professed at 11, and there's kind of this expectation that was what you were to do. If you can recall, where was your kind of personal belief at in around God at that age? I mean, did you genuinely believe in what you were doing when you professed, or were you doing it kind of out of obligation, or maybe a mixture of the two?
I would say it was, looking back on it now, I would say it was obligation. At the time, I didn't necessarily feel that, this is what I had to do. It was, this is just what you do. It wasn't anything that was forced on me. And of course, my parents were thrilled. That I professed at a young age, and but I don't remember having a very deep relationship connection with God.
It was just kind of this starting out thing. It was within the fellowship as a whole. There's this expectation that around this age is kind of this is the next step that you take as such to indicate, and of course parents are happy because they feel, okay, well now, you're safe because and maybe they thought you were before, but now you've taken the step. It's, you feel like it's
Right.
kind of confirmed.
Mhm.
And now it was around this age, if I understand, that you were also you experienced abuse.
Correct.
If you could share just a little bit about what kind of took place, and a little bit of maybe background to that, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. Um, yeah, Herb Erickson um, was my abuser.
Okay.
And he was newly married. He had been in the work in Washington State, had been moved from field to field um, because he was a predator.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and Thorold Sylvester was the overseer at the time. And what I found out later after posting my story is that I was contacted by several men in Washington State that were abused by Herb, and they, their dads, there was four of them, and
Hmm.
those four men went and confronted Thorold Sylvester, and that's when Herb was asked to leave the work. So
Hmm.
that would have been in 68.
Okay.
And then they got married. He got married right soon after leaving the work and then moved to
Okay.
Colorado.
And so he'd been asked to leave the work because of the abuse, and this is in '68. Of course, this is pre-internet and all this kind of stuff, and so maybe word didn't travel
Right.
as extensively. Were you aware of, or were there any whispers around? I mean, I guess you were a child. I mean, when you're looking back, were your parents aware that there were whispers around his behavior and why he had left the work and gotten married?
No, the reason that we had, and I didn't know this as a child, but
Of course, yeah.
finding out later, the reason that they moved to Colorado is because his health um, he had depression, and
Hmm.
so the dark, rainy, cloudy Seattle or Washington weather was not good for him. So he moved
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
Colorado where there was more sunshine.
Right. Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time. I found this out later.
Hmm. Hmm. And so he moves there. He's now married, kind of new married couple in town, I guess. Were
Mhm.
you in like a fellowship gathering with him, like a regular Sunday morning meeting, or how did you first encounter Herb?
No, we did not go to meeting with him at all through the whole time in Denver. My parents invited him to our house.
Hmm.
That's how we first connected with them. And so the whole grooming process basically started with my parents.
Right.
So he began the grooming process. They'd invite him to dinner, um, and that's when it all started. He
Hmm.
groomed them until they were comfortable with letting their children go with him,
Okay.
and so that's how the process all started. At first, it included my sister, um, and then it included my younger sister, my younger brother, and then pretty soon the sisters were out of the picture, and it was just the two boys, and then pretty soon it was just me. So it
Okay.
was a grooming process, and I can't. There's so much about that time that I can't remember. In fact, my
Mm-hmm.
sisters, talking with my sisters about it now, they bring up stuff that it's just not even in my memory
Right. Yeah,
because it
and I think
just
that's, yeah, just a really important thing to point out is that, like, one of the ways that we protect ourselves from the trauma that we experience is to kind of block it out from our conscious memory.
right.
And so, um, do you have memories of like him coming over at dinner, and prior to him isolating you, like, did he seem like a friendly, nice guy kind of thing? Was there any sort of, you know red flags that you felt like around him, or what was that like for you?
No, I didn't see any kind of red flags. I really don't even remember. We had mom was very social. We had a lot of people in our
Hmm.
house. Um, so it was just one of the things that we did was we entertained, and so
Hmm.
for them to come over to dinner, it was nothing extraordinary. Um,
Right. Right.
and so no, I didn't see any red flags. And then later on, because my parents liked them, um, I didn't. there was nothing that caused me to have any kind of bad feelings at all.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and so you're 11, 12 years old, 11 years old, kind of at this time, and we as children rely fairly heavily on the adults in our life for some sense of direction around if somebody is safe or not. And so, seeing your parents and how they interacted with him would lead you to conclude, well, if your parents trust this man, he's trustworthy. And so he then starts taking you and your siblings out. And where would he take you? Do you recall that?
Yeah, we went to gospel meetings, and usually they were a distance from Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the workers had meetings out on the kind of the eastern plains, just east of Denver, where there
Mm-hmm.
weren't a lot of friends, and so the gospel meetings were very small. And so, Denver friends went out there, to kind of
Mm-hmm.
show support and to add a few numbers to the to the meetings.
Right. Yeah.
And so we did that. He would take us children in his Volkswagen bus.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Out there to those gospel meetings, and same with special meetings out in those outlying areas. And probably no more than an hour or so from Denver, so it wasn't a long distance, but it was definitely a chance to be isolated with these kids,
Right.
and to develop some kind of friendship, I guess.
Right. Some kind of rapport.
Mm-hmm.
In around the grooming process. And so,
Right.
For whatever reason, your parents wouldn't attend these gospel meetings, but he would, if I understand correctly, he would come and say, I'll take the kids to this gospel meeting. It's like, great, the kids are out of our hair. 6 kids are a handful. Thanks for giving us a bit of a breather.
Right. Yeah, because I was 11 years old. I had the youngest was my brother, which would have been a year old, and then I had a sister that was 2 years old, and another one that was 5 years old. And so, it was a chance to have the older kids go do something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of sardonically smile at the irony of that, right? Let's,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that was kind of what was done in a sense. And it's like, okay, he's a good man. He's taking us off, he's taking our kids off our hands, your parents are thinking, and so on. And are you the oldest of 6? Did I understand that? Or where were you in line?
I'm second. I have an older sister.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so it was your older sister, yourself, and the next brother in line.
Yes. And then occasionally my sister, which would have been fourth in line, she would have been 4 years younger than me. So she would have been 8, 7, 8-ish. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And she went a few times. And looking back on it now, that was also part of the grooming process, to include my sisters to kind of make things okay.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other piece of this too was he was a worker. And
he'd been a worker.
Was, we never knew or understood, or I don't know who knew. I don't know if the overseer in Colorado knew, if they're all, prefaced it with a letter that, this is what this guy's done. I don't know that.
Right.
But there's, there were 6 overseers in my lifetime from when Thurl removed him from the work until he passed away. There were 6 overseers that were silent.
Yeah. Do you remember? Do you remember the names of the overseers? Like who your overseer was at that time? Maybe you didn't know as a kid, but
Ed Cornock would have been an overseer, and I don't know exactly if he was still overseer in '68 or not. I believe he was, because he was still overseer. He was very old, and he didn't travel much. He stayed kind of on the Denver Convention grounds most of the time at that time. But my friends had cars and stuff at the time, so that I would have been 15, 16. So, and he was still around then, very old.
Yeah.
And then Garrett Hughes came after Ed to be overseer then. And then after Garrett, it was Leslie White.
There's another notorious name.
Yep. And then Jim Price was after Leslie, and then Titus Lehman.
Yeah.
And then I've heard that he's been sent somewhere because he
Minnesota
was
currently.
sympathetic to some survivors. And now Jim Price is overseer again in Colorado.
Okay. And so going back to, so there was the grooming process of taking you and your siblings to gospel meetings to earn some trust. Hey, we had a great time. It was lots of fun. In the van rides, I don't know, did he tell stories, sing songs, or anything like that? Like,
I remember singing songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So kind of trying to make it a fun thing.
Yes.
And then at some point, he's just going to take the boys. And I don't know if you recall, did he say why he was excluding your sisters?
No. And no. And he would take, he worked nights at a bank, and I don't remember what the bank was. But
Right.
he did some sort of computer. I mean, these big reel-to-reel tape things. He would change those out. I guess they backed up their data on those at some point, and so he would change those out and back up all the data, and so we would go to work with him. I don't remember what time we went to work, but it was dark.
Yeah.
And then he would get done with work, and then he would go to the apartment, and that's where the abuse started.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it didn't happen necessarily going to and from gospeling, but that was just part of laying the groundwork that this is a godly man.
Yes.
He cares about your children, brings them to gospel meetings.
Right.
They have a good time in the van. Okay. Now did he bring any of your brothers to work as well to kind of show them, or was it just you he was bringing?
There were a number of times that my brother and I were together. And that part is kind of foggy. I think kind of what I remember, if my brother and I were together, he took us home right after work.
Right.
But
okay.
Once in a while I would go by myself, and then that's when we went back to the apartment.
Right. Okay. And do you have any recollection of the time frame from the time that like he first started grooming to when he got to the place where he's taking you alone to the apartment?
I don't remember that, and I've asked my sisters too, and I know going to some of the special meetings and gospel meetings, it was cold, so it would have been maybe early in the year. It seemed like, because we went on a couple of fishing trips, which I don't remember that we went. But my sister said, don't you remember the fishing trips? And I don't.
Right.
I just don't remember those. So those had to have been during the summer.
Yeah.
But the abuse had already started at that point. And so to be with him in this setting with my siblings, I guess I just blanked it out. I just don't remember.
Right. For sure. But so I think, and the reason I asked that is to try to help people understand a little bit of like what the process might look like. And again, I thank you for sharing, because I know some of the stuff just doesn't exist, and that's okay. But it seems like it was a process, like a matter of months.
Yeah, it was over a course of, I would say 6 months, in total.
Okay.
That the process, because, with conversations lately, I've kind of pieced together more of a timeline that, it was pretty immediate that when him and his wife landed in Denver, that they got hooked up with my family.
Right.
I mean, it was a very short time before that happened. And then, the grooming process started immediately.
Right. And it seemed like, now are you aware of, or did he abuse any of your siblings, or were you the only one that he picked out?
That is their story to tell. I'll
Okay.
just leave it there.
Fair enough. And so this process happened. What kind of kid were you, 11, 12 years old, that you can recall prior to this happening?
Very much of an introvert,
Okay.
very bashful. Speaking in meeting was painful.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Almost terrifying.
Terrifying, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was very quiet. And then, with the bringing, being raised that children are to be seen and not heard, and that
Hmm.
type of stuff, I didn't have a voice. I mean, I just
Hmm.
didn't. And in our family, there wasn't any there wasn't any individual conversation with that I remember with any of the kids. Like, we
Right.
didn't have any one-on-one conversations with either one of our parents.
Right. Right.
At least I didn't. Um,
Yeah. So, and thank you for sharing that as well. And I think, I wonder if sometimes predators, I mean, it seems like they know how to pick their victims well.
they know.
There's
Absolutely.
just, this one won't speak up.
Yep. Yep. And they know it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they, and the thing that I have thought about since, I wrote my story and reading all these stories online, I don't almost wonder if, there are elders that point these workers to different children. Um,
You know, I,
this child could be vulnerable. This child is really super quiet, and I don't know, man. It just
yeah, there's something, and let's, we'll put that in the shiny object drawer for just a little bit later in the interview here, because I
okay.
think there's something to kind of unpack there. I appreciate you sharing that, because I've had some questions about that, and I think it wouldn't hurt to have a bit of a discussion. But so just with your story, so that he would take you to work at the bank with
Mhm.
him, you'd watch him work or whatever, and then he would bring you back to the apartment. And do you have in your memory, like, any recollection of the first time going to his apartment at all?
Yes, I definitely do.
Yeah.
And his wife was there as well.
Okay.
And I don't know what she did because we
Right.
went in the bedroom to sleep, right? Well, it was
Oh,
more
okay.
than
So
sleep. Um,
right. So was this framed as like a sleepover or something like that, or?
no, it was just that's what he did when he worked all night. He came home and went to bed, went to sleep,
Right.
and I just
But
happened to
somehow.
be with him. And it was okay with her, evidently, that we slept in the same room. You know, uh,
Right.
the apartment was small.
Fair.
I
Yeah.
don't remember if it was more than one bedroom. I don't remember that, but the apartment was very small, so I'm assuming that it was a one bedroom.
Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. That, I mean, of course, we can look, and try to be careful of what sort of lens of hindsight I applied to it, because, 2023, we can sit here and say, like, you know, um, of course, this seems like red flag behavior, but,
Mhm.
and I don't know, and you can share what you may or may not understand, whether his wife was complicit, understanding, or completely naive. Um, but to the brain of a person who isn't predatorial in nature, some you're not even like looking for or thinking about this could happen.
Right.
Uh, there was an experience where I was groomed and taken advantage of, not in a sexual manner, but in a different context. And I don't
Mhm.
want to share too much because it's not. This isn't about my story, but just enough to say, um, when you're not looking for it, you probably won't see it, because my brain didn't operate that way to think that this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And it
No,
took somebody else pointing out to me, hey, there's
yep.
something not right about what's happening in this situation here.
Yep.
And at first I was like, no, you don't understand. And it took quite a while for me to accept the reality of the situation I'd
Mhm.
found myself in.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true.
And so, I don't know if you have any understanding or any comment on whether whether his wife understood, was complicit, or was entirely naive. Do you have any awareness of that?
I don't. I
Fair enough.
didn't
Yeah.
at the time, other than the fact that she was an adult,
Hmm.
and it seemed like it was okay to her for her with her to for me to be in the bedroom with him.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's the only context that I really saw it as. It was just another
Sure.
adult that kind of made it seem all right. This is the
Right.
thing that,
And so in particular, preying on a male victim versus a female victim, maybe thinking that, well, this man's married to a woman, so he's heterosexual, so nothing would take place in a homosexual context, and yet that was
yeah, I didn't even think of that. I mean,
yeah.
sex was not talked about in our home.
Right, of
I
course.
had no clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
And
your friends, your neighbor friends talk about stuff, but
right.
it's still
Yeah.
the reality of it. I mean, yeah, I didn't
And
even have
I mean,
words for it.
right. So not only was it kind of in an era where it was, well, I mean, the 60s was maybe the start of like the free love revolution. I guess I'm a child of the 80s, so, but
Yeah, it
like
was 60s and 70s. Yes.
like there was an expanding consciousness and conversation around that, but you were still a child very much at this point. And so, you might have been hearing some things, but in the home context and probably in the school or education context, it wasn't talked about either.
No.
It was only like these sort of furtive conversations, uh, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of the context. And so he brings you into the bedroom. That's kind of where that is where the abuse took place. After the first time that took place, do you have any memory? Like, did you like leave? Did you stay the night? And then go home the next day, or what was sort of the context there, if you recall?
Well, it would have been early in the morning that we went to bed.
Okay. Yeah.
And then when he woke up, he took me home. So it would have been, I don't know, noon time or so,
Right. Right.
early afternoon.
Yeah. And again, this whole hindsight thing, but it's just like, seems strange that you're taking a kid to work through the night, and then like everything about this seems odd to hear it now. I mean, again, I try to be careful about
Absolutely.
my lens of understanding, but I was like, surely something seemed odd about this. Like, were you going to school, and why would you go to work and then sleep half the day? Or maybe this was taking place over the summer
Well,
or
I
on weekends.
think it was taking place over the summer. Otherwise, my parents wouldn't have let me do it.
Right. So maybe again, it was this. Oh, this is sort of a good learning experience because he's going to go learn about how a bank works and things like
Right.
that. And so Herb's being such a good friend to him, and
Mm-hmm.
or like a mentor kind of figure or something like that.
Yes.
And then so what was sort of the length of time that this abuse was carried out, and how long did it go before it came to an end?
It was several months that it went for. The number of times, I am not sure.
For sure. Yeah.
The last time it happened was, and it seemed like each time was more aggressive, more.
There was an escalation.
Yeah, there was definitely an escalation, more domineering, and so the very last time it happened was it was on a camping trip. I see it. I mean, I remember it as a camping trip, and it might have been another fishing trip. But anyway, we did camp. We did stay the night. And rather than pitching a tent, we slept in the car. He had an old Rambler, the seats folded down to where you can make a bed inside, and so that's where we slept. My brother was with us at the time, but I woke up in the middle of the night by him, halfway on top of me, and his hands down my pants, and and so that was the last time. I just avoided him at all costs. Although I still had to see him in gospel meeting and convention and special meeting, and he was just so overt about it, just so calloused, just every chance he got, he'd come real close and just
molest you, grope you, feel you, like.
Yeah, he never really touched me, but he was just so like in your face about it.
Right.
It's like I got away with this and nobody's going to do anything about it, and you're not going to tell anybody. And kind of keeping the intimidation, I guess you'd say, going for years and years. Even after I was married.
Wow, that is that's quite something to think about. And again, so pardon me, when the abuse was taking place, I mean, you're probably aware that this is wrong. Something about the situation is wrong, and this I don't want this to happen.
Absolutely.
But
I didn't know what it was. I mean, at
right.
that
So first of all,
time,
you didn't have any words to vocalize. This is what's
no,
happening to me.
no.
And then secondly, there's the fear. Like if you speak
Mhm.
up, something bad's going to happen. Do you recall? Did he make threats to coerce you into silence?
Never. No.
Okay.
He just knew. And
Right.
that is, I mean, that is what's going on with in the ministry today. Is they know they're not going to get caught. They know nobody's going to talk.
Yeah.
They know they can do whatever they want, and you know nobody's going to
Yeah.
believe you because of who I am.
Yeah.
You know,
It might
I'm
only
a
be like this year as things are blowing wide open that people are
right.
realizing, okay. And I sure hope that if predators are paying attention, they recognize that we're coming for them, like, and that we have no tolerance for them. But
You know, Jonathan, I don't know. I think they're so I don't know
yeah.
what they are so convinced that they're never going to get caught.
Oh, there's a pathological like arrogance
Oh
or
yeah,
narcissism
absolutely.
connected to this,
Yeah.
like,
Hmm.
and to be blunt, I think I heard an expression recently that said something like, everything is about sex except for sex, which is about power.
Yep.
Now, of course, we know there's a healthy context for a sexual relationship in like a healthy committed relationship, but I mean, otherwise, like that's kind of this thing, and it's there's this power, this dominance you talked about, like, and he again, knowing that you're this sort of shy, introverted kid,
Hmm.
and like, was he a particularly like larger, imposing figure or anything like that,
Not at
or was
all.
it
No,
just
he
how he
was.
carried himself was just like there was this sort of self assuredness that was like, yeah, you're not going to say a thing.
Yeah, and I would say just out in the general public, no, he wasn't. He wasn't a big man, and
Mhm, mhm.
um, he wasn't a flashy dresser. He was very nondescript kind of
Like
guy.
blended in,
Yeah,
yeah, blended
yeah,
in so well,
yeah,
as many of them do.
yeah.
And I appreciate that detail too, because I think, and why I ask that, for anybody who's listening, you might be thinking, why ask that question? Because sometimes there's some preconceived notions in and around what an abuser might look like or be
Hmm.
like or behave like and so on. And I think it's important to understand that, really, for lack of a better term, they come in all shapes and sizes.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yep.
and it's there's so much like a mental and emotional sort of component to it that goes far beyond any kind of just purely like physical domination here.
Hmm.
And maybe there was like a strength and size differential when you were a kid, but and I guess I wonder, I don't know if you recall this or not. Did you ever try to fend off or fight the advances that you can recall or aware of? Like, um,
Um, just the last time.
you were like,
Um,
that's it. This is not
yeah,
happening again.
yeah. I
Yeah.
just said this is so wrong, and yeah,
Yeah.
no more.
Yeah, and I guess, like you said, your brother was there in the setting or situation there. Was he aware? Like did this happen like in the context of the actual abuse, or was it afterwards, like the next day, next morning kind of thing, where you said this is never happening again?
Well, in my mind that night, I said this
Yeah,
is never happening again,
yeah,
and I told him verbally that this is wrong,
yeah.
and so he backed off.
Mm.
And I don't know to this day if my brother was aware of that. I don't know if he was
Right.
awake. I don't know if he
So
witnessed that.
that's another interesting thing is if you said to him like this is wrong and it stopped, is that he recognized that, oh, there's a slight risk here now.
Hmm.
This kid's
Right.
getting stronger and he might speak up.
Right.
But still he sort of carried on this kind of
Yes.
intimidation tactic where it was like, uh the abuse was maybe too risky to continue, but like the coercion or the intimidation into remaining silent is what continued.
Yes. And that also gives a pedophile a sense of power. They still have power over their victim, even though they're not actually in a physical act with them. They still can control them emotionally.
Mm-mm. Because of the traumatic like emotional damage that happens to your
Yes.
developing brain at the time.
Yes.
Many people don't realize the male brain does not complete its adulthood development till approximately 28 years of age.
Right.
at 12 years of age, you're not a fully grown, developed brain. There's so much more that's happening. But now it's like, when a car's been in a car accident, you can sort of pull out the dents and cover over the scratches, but like the damage is still there under the surface.
Yes.
And it's never going to be quite the same.
The Bondo is covering it all up.
Right. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, this is all kind of taking place in the context of the fellowship. You had professed, you'd been baptized. Did that change your perception about like God or the Bible or the fellowship?
It didn't change anything to do with God or the Bible or fellowship at the time. What it did to me was that I can't trust people. And so even to this day, to fully trust somebody is really hard for me. And especially men. If I'm looking for a doctor or a dentist or an eye doctor or whatever, I will look for a woman doctor. I just don't trust. I don't trust men, and I don't have any close male friends. I have, if I have a good friendship with somebody, it's usually a woman.
And I think again, that's pardon me, that's so important to share, because we're talking, this is, I don't know, what, 40, 50,
55 years later.
Yeah, there's still this effect.
Yep.
And so at a certain point in time, and I want to bring this one back too, but at a certain point in time, you decide, okay, I no longer want to be part of this fellowship. And of course, you've been traumatized by a male in this fellowship. This fellowship generally holds males in high regard and males in position of responsibility. So elders, workers, overseers, they're all held in this high regard. And so kind of facing this hierarchy, was what happened to you in terms of abuse part of the reason why you also no longer wanted to be a part of this fellowship? Or what kind of pushed you out or caused you to say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore?
So yes, it was, I guess not in anything specific about the abuse, but just the fact that I had met a couple of people in the course of business that were just really, really good people, very honest, lots of integrity. And to look at them through the lens of the truth that these people aren't saved and they don't have a future with God, I just couldn't see that anymore. And I couldn't see the exclusivity of this truth and this way being the only way to heaven and the only way to salvation. I just couldn't see that anymore.
Yeah.
And then we moved from Denver to Grand Junction, and Grand Junction's very conservative. And I remember the very last meeting we were in, my wife and I, we just came out after that meeting and got in the car, and we both looked at each other and said, we can't do this anymore. And it was, so the meeting was very judgmental in my view, in my opinion. I mean, that's what I felt that morning. A number of testimonies were very, very judgmental and
pointed, and
yeah. And I just couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, it felt too uncomfortable. And you mentioned your wife. What do you, because one of the things I also wanted to ask about is like the abuse had taken place kind of through your teen years and going into like young adulthood and whatnot. How was your socialization? Like, were you able to form friendships with boys of your same age going through the teenage years, or were you still remaining fairly shy and introverted?
No, I had a number of friends, professing guys from the Denver area. And a lot of them were very good friends.
Right. Yeah.
They were all, professing in the meetings from professing families. And then I had a lot of neighborhood friends, all boys.
Right. Yeah.
And got along with them very well.
And, so it's adult men, because it was an adult male that had abused you. Correct. That really, much more difficult to trust. But it seemed like people of your peer group at that time, were the likelihood of them doing that to you was relatively small.
Yes, absolutely. And I was a big kid.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I never feared for myself, even though I was super shy. I mean, I never got in any fights or anything like that, but I was
You
just a big kid. I was kind of
you grew into like a
imposing.
physical presence that
Yeah.
you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so kind of going forward here, when was the first time you spoke up about what happened to you, and how was it
Uh,
received?
I first spoke up to my girlfriend, which was to become my wife. I was, she was probably 17, 18 when I told
Mhm.
her.
Yeah.
And she's actually the one that told my parents. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
With
And
your permission, or?
no.
Oh, okay.
um, um, she is also a victim of abuse, and not
Mhm,
not to have to do with anyone in the truth, but
mhm,
she
mhm.
suffered some abuse as well, extensive
Yeah.
abuse actually.
All too
So
common theme we're hearing these days. Yeah.
she was she just thought they should know, because they didn't know who I was. Um, they didn't know why I had chosen, a certain path in life that they didn't really like, and
Mhm.
so she wanted them to know why.
Yeah.
And I'm glad she did. And that would have been, um, so I would have been 18, 19.
Mm-mm. And
Um,
was she professing?
yes. Hmm.
Yeah. And so she felt there's a need to tell them about this. And you mentioned the path in life you had chosen. What path was that your parents might not have been happy about?
Just not being super professing.
Fair enough.
you
Not
know,
playing by the rules.
yeah, missing gospel meetings and missing special meetings and not going to Wednesday night meeting.
Yeah.
Still went to Sunday morning meeting and some gospel meetings, but just not real, I guess, riding the fence, which is
Right.
what they weren't too excited about.
Mhm, mhm.
And they thought it was her influence, which it,
Ah, okay.
which it wasn't. Mhm.
No. But then she spoke up and said,
Mhm.
this is why he is probably avoiding being a part of this fellowship, because
Yeah.
again, there's been serious damage done. And when your parents heard about it, how did they respond?
Well, talking to my mom just recently after I wrote my story, she said that her and dad came home from work and she told him, and um, they just kind of looked at each other and said, "Now what do we do?" And that was it. Nothing happened.
Yeah, yeah. Um, how long ago was it that Herb passed away?
2020, 2 years ago.
Okay,
So
2021.
21.
Yeah, and are you aware? Like, was he a member of the fellowship, or like did any further stories come to light, or was he a full member of the fellowship until he passed away?
He was a full member of the fellowship. Actually, had meeting in his home, a Wednesday
Mhm.
night meeting, and
Yeah.
yeah, and we didn't live in Denver. We had moved up northern Colorado, and so my mom had called me and said that Herb was going Leslie was going to put a meeting in Herb and Dorothy's home, a Wednesday night meeting, and so I wasn't going to do anything about it, but she was. And so she talked to Leslie, and Leslie had him write me an apology letter, which turned out to be um, kind of a slap in the face. Um,
Yeah, no kidding.
and so, since he wrote the apology letter, he was able to have a Wednesday night meeting in his home. And so, we have a predator covering for a predator.
Yeah, and for those who aren't aware, Leslie White is a terrible, horrific
Yes.
predator.
Yes.
And at this point, he's the overseer of Colorado, and so it's like, just tell him, I have no idea how the conversation went, but I just write an
Yeah.
apology letter and everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Well, of course it's okay in his light because he's a blinking predator who's still alive to this day
Yes.
currently.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, he is.
and so did his apology letter, Herb's apology letter, like acknowledge that, like, hey, I did something inappropriate with you? Do you recall?
I'm sorry for anything that happened between us.
Wow. Yeah, just let's completely minimize what took place.
Yeah. And you could read that 100 different ways, like,
Yeah.
I ran into your car 5 years ago. I'm sorry about that. It's kind of
Yeah.
that thing,
So, and what time or how many years ago did this apology letter come out?
This was in 2011, approximately.
And then he gets a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With little or no concern about whatever children would be going to that home for meeting.
And at this point in time, like 2011, like this stuff wasn't a secret even back then.
No.
And this is the part that gets me kind of fired up. So I'm like, there are people who knew and did nothing. In fact, they did worse than nothing. They let it keep happening, and they created conditions where this could keep happening. That's where I get pissed off. I got 2 young boys, and I'll be damned if anyone, I'm going to do everything I can to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And
and we did the same thing with our children too. There was, we were hyper aware of any possibility that would put them at risk.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was covered up. It was covered up by multiple overseers. When it was brought to their attention, they did nothing about it. When it came time to put a meeting in his home, your mom did try to speak up. She felt like somebody needs to know this isn't right. But so your parents first heard about it, pardon me, in what would that be, about 1976, 1975, thereabouts?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Yeah. And they weren't sure what to do. And of course, back then, again, we're still talking no internet. People wrote letters and made phone calls. That was communication. Communication wasn't widespread. Plus, it was like protect the image. And so, what do we do? Because if this becomes public, or we take it to the courts of men, or things like that, and so I don't want to be too harsh in my judgment in one sense, because I understand, in one sense, I understand the kind of the conditioning that they had been raised in and under. But on the same token, I go like, why could it not have been seen as wrong then?
Well, it was seen as wrong. It was it was a secret, and so the truth is great at hiding secrets. And
that's why I don't call it that. I call it the fellowship.
Well, and I call it the truth in quotes.
Right. And this is the part that, again, it frustrates me, and I said it a couple of times, but I try to be thoughtful about the level of judgment I apply to past generations based on their conditioning and the lens of hindsight. Yes, it is 2020, but if you're trying to follow what the Bible teaches, what part of this seems like we should keep this a secret? We should not protect little children. What part of that?
It's so clear. It's crystal clear.
Yeah.
But this whole system is set up to perpetrate this kind of behavior.
You've probably spent. I shouldn't assume, I guess, but I wonder, like, have you spent a number of years kind of as you, or let's take one step back. Were you able to start on a healing journey? And if so, what was helpful for you to begin healing?
So I started on my healing journey when I left the meetings in 2004. Okay. So it's been nearly 20 years of looking everywhere for healing, for trying to, because my life took a direction that wasn't me. I overcompensated for feeling vulnerable. I overcompensated for having someone take advantage of me. And I had vowed to myself that would never happen again. And so, I overcompensated. I never was a competing bodybuilder, but I lifted weights constantly. I got in the construction field where the rough and tumble guys worked, in my mind, and rode Harleys and drove pickups and, loud cars and all that stuff that I thought, was manly. And so, nearly 20 years, and I finally figured out who I really am is, I'm an empath. I'm an artist. I'm a potter. I'm not that tough guy at all. And that's okay. I mean, that's who I am.
It is so funny that you mentioned that. I'm very similar in that regard.
Yeah.
I've been through trauma. Again, I don't want to, it's not about my story this time around, but just to say that I've been through trauma, and there was a lot of hypermasculine behavior to compensate,
Hmm.
whether it was racing fast
Absolutely.
motorcycles, loud music, lifting heavy weights,
Yep.
being a power lifter,
Yep.
um, and it turns out I'm an empath,
Yep.
and I'm a huge teddy bear, you know,
Yeah. Exactly. That's me too.
and yeah, it's incredible to think. And so from the time that the abuse ended until 2004 spans, 30, over 3 decades,
Yeah. 40 years.
carrying that weight with you
Hmm. Yeah.
and kind of not sure what to do with it. What was that kind of the point that you said, I have to do something about this? What was kind of the tipping point for you?
Well, I guess the major tipping point was on July 27th this year, when
Okay.
my sister told me about these Facebook pages, and I started reading these stories, and you know, looked at Lauren and Sherry and Cynthia's lives and their stories, and I mean, wow, I just knew at that moment um, that I had to write my story.
Mhm, mhm.
I had to get
Yeah.
I had to get the secret out, because the secret was affecting me in every aspect of my life.
Mhm.
And so the freedom really has come since my story was published on August 3rd. And the freedom from that has been incredible. And
It's
I
kind of like,
just oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's kind of like having this, there's like a poisonous like sliver stuck kind of inside of you, and
And it just
it's just circulating, it's affecting you, and you pull that out.
and you begin to heal.
Yeah.
And writing your story, making that public, naming names, getting it out there so there's nothing else to hide, begins a healing process.
Yeah. When you begin to recognize and openly accept, I think it was in the movie Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you saw that one back in 1997
No.
with Matt Damon and some other guy. I'm not good with celebrities and stuff like that, but I just remember a scene in the movie. Someone who watching can comment below in the comments. But the therapist is saying to this boy, like, or this young man, like, it's not your fault, and he kept repeating, it's not your fault, until like the anger broke down, or the walls of anger kind of broke down and became tears.
Mhm.
You know, it's not your fault. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose this. You weren't given the tools to even navigate this. Like, none of us are really prepared to navigate this. And so we hide our secrets in shame, thinking if people see like who I truly am, if they know what's going to
Yep.
happen, what happened to me, they're going to reject me. They're going to look at me, in disparaging ways and things. And I'm so grateful there's like this environment where now stories are met with like compassion and a desire to contribute to healing, instead of,
Right.
and maybe there's still denigration. There are those who are out there who feel like these stories are just like damaging the reputation of this fellowship. These stories aren't damaging the reputation of this
No.
fellowship. It's these predators that have done almost irreparable damage to it.
Yes.
If you want to be angry at somebody, be angry at every single predator who
Right.
harmed an innocent human being,
Right.
particularly children. That is
Yes.
the worst of the worst of crimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And it's been 55 years, and nobody has ever from this fellowship has ever reached out to me ever to see how I was doing. And
yeah.
I've known through email these ladies at Advocates, and I mean, I've received such amazing emails from Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
They just pop up that, hey, I'm thinking about you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. Just knowing that somebody understands. And I bet, I'm willing to bet that the parable of the Good Samaritan has been spoken of by a lot of good, honest people who know this is absolutely terrible what is taking place.
Yes.
And there's this moment of understanding, like, we forgot the wounding and the bleeding in the ditch.
Yeah.
We forgot about them. We forgot about the most important thing. And I actually don't know where your beliefs are. I don't know if you still are a Christian or a Bible believer or where you stand on that. And it doesn't matter to me, but I mean, you're welcome to share where you're at in your spiritual journey. And
I believe there is a higher being. You know, God, the word God is it's not a comforting word to me today, because of all the things that are done and said in God's name. So I believe in a higher being, the universe creator, you know, whatever. But yes, I just think that this world and this creation and the creation of nature and human beings, there's just got to be a higher being in control of it somewhere.
Absolutely. And I can understand, and I appreciate even sharing that. The name of God isn't very comforting to you because the name of God was used, you know, in ways against you. And, you know, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I feel a sense of assurance that, you know, God himself is also angry at those who use his name to perpetrate these things. And, you know, is not offended by you saying, I feel pain around that name because of how it was used against me. And so, you know, I think the Good Samaritan in the Bible, it talks about, the most important thing is love your neighbor as, you know, love God first and then love your neighbor as yourself, and everything else hangs on those two things. And if you don't do those, if that's not the foundation, there's nothing there.
Right.
And so this like emphasis on form and appearance and looking a certain way creates the cover for predators. You know, I said the thing that we put in the shiny objects drawer, you know, you feel like I've wondered, like, is there somehow like a ring of predators who somehow secretly communicate with each other or something like that? Because
I believe there is. I believe there is.
Yeah. The stats are, and these are not verified stats. I can't speak with absolute veracity. This is 100% truth. I want to preface this, but what I can say is from the statistics that we have seen and come to understand, it's in the neighborhood of approximately 1 in 6 workers is an abuser. So that's about 3 times worse than the Catholic Church, because it's about 1 in 17, 1 in 18 priests who's been, you know, and those stats, 1 in 6, might be underestimating. And that's why I say we can't verify this, because they could be far worse and we don't know. But that's where we're at right now. Where, you know, and it takes years for all of this to come out, and this is only starting to come out. Just like we think about what happened to you and how many years it was before, like, it first came out to a couple of close people to you this had taken place, and how many, you know, it takes so many years for victims and survivors to come forward and share their story. And that's what makes it so difficult we could be finding out 10 years, 15, 20 years later, still more stories coming out, because it takes that long for survivors. And I really hope that we are creating the conditions where survivors feel like they can come forward with their stories. But
I hope so. I just hope so. And
I was, and before I head back over to you, I was just going to say it's about 1 in 10 elders that we have estimated. Again, these are not verified, but we know that those who are predators are attracted to positions of power and authority. And when this fellowship elevates those people that hold that status and assumes or presumes a higher level of godliness and spirituality because of the position that they hold, they use that as cover for their evil deeds.
Yes.
And so I'd love to hear your thoughts. You know, you mentioned, you know, what you feel like this whole system or hierarchy is kind of like the perfect breeding grounds for abusers and perpetrators.
Yeah, the way this fellowship is designed. You know, the workers are above all. The workers are, you know, what they say is what you do. They stay in people's homes. They have access to children all the time. People give them carte blanche with their children. Just because you're a worker, I mean, you can take the kids camping, you can take the kids on a picnic, you can take the kids fishing. Yeah, it's set up perfect for the workers to groom the parents to get to their children. And that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, that Herb Erickson sat at my parents' dinner table, ate their food, enjoyed their fellowship, enjoyed their generosity, and then abused their children. And that happens a lot, way more than any of us know at this moment. And I hope it continues to come forward.
100%. Yeah. And so we don't know, but it's are there these groups of people, these secret communications where, I wonder, and this is pure speculation, but I wonder, is there a ring? Is there some kind of pedophile ring? Is there a way that they communicate with each other? Because how is this so bad?
How is it so prevalent?
How is it,
Yep.
Have we just discovered, are we just uncovering literally the tip of the iceberg?
I think we have so far, yes.
Yeah.
And it's just not the male workers either. There's it's coming forward now that there's some women that are involved in this as well.
Absolutely. And I think, again, maybe this is, I don't know, maybe people go in the ministry because they think this will help them. Maybe some people start out with like this awareness of like, I have these tendencies, and maybe if I become a worker or a minister of the gospel, somehow that'll correct these tendencies. There could be some elements of that, or they're purely pathological people.
I think there's probably some of both.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that it's so cut and dry, because I want to be careful to apply the pathological label to everyone, but then also the system. Does the system create or incubate predators?
Definitely incubates them. Somebody that may not have those tendencies, or maybe have the tendencies, and like you said, go into work that they think they can, be safe from them, to be isolated from them, only to find out that this is a perfect place for them to perpetrate their fantasies. Because they're with children all the time.
Yeah.
And then they get a place of power and they become an overseer. And then who's going to believe them? Who's going to believe the victims?
Yeah. And what we've seen in recent months is like overseers doing what we call placating.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll use this analogy. I've seen because you were in the building business, I've seen builders advertise that we make all our buildings up to code. I'm like,
of course.
I'm like, first off, code is the minimum safe standard.
That is the minimum. Yes.
Like, you're bragging that we do the bare minimum. If you say we go up to code, are you telling me that you would do less than that if you could?
Yes, they would.
And so when we see workers implementing policies, first off, we're practically arm dragging them and being like, you have to do this. And there's very few that are like, passionately stepping forward and saying, we must do this. They're all being dragged with their arm twisted behind their back, saying, we are not going to shut up. We are not going to stop talking about this. We are not going to cover you. We are not going to support you. We will not be silent in the face of this evil and allow you to cover. And yet it's like, why is it such a fight?
Yeah.
Why is it such a fight?
Yeah.
And it's because they've all kind of been conditioned, indoctrinated, incubated, whatever. It's like, you are not protecting anything except predators when you fail to fight and try to root this out.
Yeah, they're predators, and maybe themselves.
Yeah. I don't mean to hijack your story when I get a little bit fired up either. But I get so frustrated by all of this as well. And yet, I think as a Christian, I still like the idea of what this was supposed to be. I'm like, I think, but I hate what it's become.
Yes.
If I could put it that way, I hate what it's become.
I agree.
Because this is not what God intended. Well, Dale, I want to say thank you so much for your honesty, for your sharing. And thank you for letting me rant a little bit in your story.
I do have just one more thing to tell you.
Please do.
It's a silver lining in all this. about a month ago, we were moving from Colorado to Wisconsin. And so it was a week before we were to actually leave. The daughter of my abuser contacted me and invited us, my wife and I, out to dinner to meet. And boy, that was, it's like, wow, I don't know if I'm ready for this. But we did go and met her and her husband, and we're at the restaurant for, I don't know, 3 hours. And then I'm also a potter, and so I make functional pottery. And so the next day, my wife just suggested, maybe Alan and Susie would like to come over and pick out some pottery. Since we're leaving the state, they'll have a piece of you. So they did, and they brought their two boys, and Taylor, their oldest boy, his wife, also. And I mean, it's been fabulous. And it's been a healing process for both of us, for Susie, for her family, and for me as well, to be able to connect and to, I don't know, have this thing in common. It just seems, it's hard to explain, but it's been a fabulous journey.
That's beautiful. And I think about not putting the sins of the father on the children.
Yep.
And I think you've also, and thank you for interrupting me, and thank you for sharing that. I think about what it would be like to be a child, or the child of an abuser, and whether or not they were abused or not, but to learn that, and maybe, and I don't know the story, and it's not it's not our story to tell,
right.
But to learn if you didn't know, my dad was a monster.
Yeah. Well, that's what they're learning. Yeah.
Right. And then to be on the receiving end of vitriol because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And say, well, maybe we could do something. And I imagine there's probably tears.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's been it's been great. I can now really relate to Sherry and Lauren too. I mean, it's kind of the same situation of having this abuser in common. It's so hard to explain, but the peace and the freedom and the healing that has come of it is extraordinary.
Yeah. I kind of just want to almost have like a little pause just to acknowledge that the beauty of that. I'm so grateful that you've shared that, and I think it's so wonderful to hear, for other people to hear and be encouraged by. And so, just as we close out, I want to just give you the opportunity to share anything you would like to share, any words of wisdom, words of encouragement. What if someone's listening to this conversation today, regardless of whether they're in, out, whatever, what would you like them to maybe take away from this?
Well, for parents and grandparents, just be careful with your children and your grandchildren. Make sure that you don't put them in harm's way, even if you think the workers in your field or the workers that you know are good and honorable people. Right now, I wouldn't trust that. For those of you that are victims and survivors, if you haven't told your story, please do. There is healing in it. And collectively, if we join our voices, change will happen.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been emotional. I feel it too. I'm an empath, and if you'd accept a hug from me, if I ever meet you in person, I'd give you one.
I would give you one too.
Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being an encouragement for so many others. And I sure hope this isn't our last conversation.
I hope not.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Hidden Truth. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. It is so important that these stories are heard so that we continue to raise awareness and support victim survivors in their healing journey. For those who've been affected but haven't found your voice yet, I hope these stories inspire you to keep moving forward on your healing journey. Take care.